Hey, welcome to our explainer. Today, we're going to dive into one of the absolute cornerstones of Christian theology, the atonement. But we're not just going to tell a story. We're going to break this down almost like an architect's blueprint to see how each piece, the life, the death, and the resurrection of Christ, is designed to solve a really specific problem. So, let's get into it.
So here's our roadmap. First, we have to understand the problem that needs solving in the first place. That's what theologians call the need for atonement. Then, we'll look at how Christ's life is presented as the essential groundwork. After that, we hit the main event, unpacking the 4 different functions his death is said to perform. From there, we'll see the resurrection as the ultimate proof of success, and finally, what it all means for the big picture. You'll see how each step logically builds on the one before it.
All right, let's kick off with part 1, a need for atonement. You know, before you can really appreciate an answer, you have to fully grasp the question. This entire theological structure is built as a solution to one single core problem.
So what is that core problem? I mean, what is the fundamental issue that everything else we're about to discuss is designed to fix?
And the answer, according to this framework, is simple and incredibly direct: human sin. In this theological view, this is the root cause, the fracture that sets this whole cosmic drama in motion. It's the problem that demands a divine solution.
Which brings us to our most important term for today, atonement. The best way to think of it is like a bridge. Sin creates a chasm, and atonement is the bridge back across. According to this doctrine, it's the only way provided by God to solve the sin problem, and it's presented as the one and only path for believers to gain eternal life.
Okay, so if sin is the problem and atonement is the solution, what's the very first step in building that bridge? Well, that brings us right to part 2, the life of obedience. The idea here is that for the final acts to have any meaning at all, the stage had to be set absolutely perfectly during Christ's life on earth.
The key phrase to lock onto here is perfect obedience. The argument goes that this wasn't just about living a good life or being a nice person. No, it had to be a life lived in perfect, flawless alignment with God's will. In this theological view, this perfect track record is what qualifies Christ to be the one to carry out the atonement. Honestly, without this perfect foundation, the rest of the entire argument kind of falls apart.
All right, the stage is set. Now we get to the absolute heart of the matter, the central mechanism of it all, the meaning behind Christ's death. This theology argues it wasn't just a single event with one purpose. Nope, it was doing 4 distinct jobs, all at the same time. Let's unpack each one.
So the 4 functions are substitutionary, expiatory, reconciling, and transforming. I know, these might sound like big, complicated academic words, but they each describe a really simple, powerful idea: taking someone's place, wiping a debt clean, fixing a broken relationship, and changing someone from the inside out. Let's break them down one by one.
First up, substitutionary. This is probably the one you're most familiar with. It's pretty straightforward. Imagine someone gets a penalty, a punishment they have to face. A substitute is someone who steps in and takes that penalty for them. So in this view, Christ steps in and takes the penalty for humanity's sin on their behalf.
Next, we have expiatory. Now this goes a step further. It's about wiping the slate completely clean. So if substitution is about someone else paying your fine, expiation is about getting the crime erased from your record entirely. It's not just paying the penalty, it's about removing the guilt itself.
Third is reconciling. This is where we shift from a legal idea to a relational one. The argument is that sin didn't just break a law, it broke a relationship, the one between God and humanity. So reconciliation is the act of repairing that broken bond, bringing 2 parties who were at odds back together. It's all about restoring that connection.
And finally, we have transforming. And this one might just be the most radical of all. This isn't just about your legal status or your relationship status with God. This is about an internal change. The idea is that the atonement actually kicks off a process that begins to change a believer's very nature and character from the inside out.
So if the death supposedly performed all 4 of those amazing functions, how do we know it actually worked, right? That's the logical next question. And that brings us to the climax of the entire narrative, the triumphant resurrection. Within this framework, the resurrection is the ultimate proof. It's the receipt. It's the public announcement that everything that came before it was a success, the seal of victory.
You can really think of it in these terms. On one side, you have the conflict, this cosmic battle against what the text calls the forces of evil. On the other side, you have the resolution. The resurrection is presented as that decisive, universe-altering moment that declares God's total triumph in that struggle.
So what does this victory actually mean for believers on a personal level? Well, according to the doctrine, it's a three-part assurance. It guarantees a final victory over sin, a final victory over death itself, and as a result, access to eternal life. Essentially, the resurrection is the proof that the payment was accepted and the deal is sealed.
Okay, this brings us to our final section, where we zoom all the way out. We've talked about the individual, but now let's look at the cosmic implications. What did all this mean for the nature of God and the universe itself? This is about vindication and lordship.
First, let's talk about vindication, because this is a fascinating theological concept. It argues that the atonement solves a kind of divine paradox. How can God be perfectly just, meaning sin has to be punished, and at the same time be perfectly merciful, meaning he wants to forgive? They seem like opposites, right? Well, the atonement is presented as the answer. By condemning sin through a substitute, justice is served. By providing forgiveness through that same act, mercy is shown. It allows God to be 100% of both, which vindicates his character.
And all of this, every single piece we've discussed, culminates in one final, ultimate declaration: lordship. The grand conclusion of this entire theological argument is that the life, death, and resurrection of Christ establish his supreme authority over everything in creation, an authority that, as the text says, every knee will one day acknowledge.
And that leaves us with one last massive question to think about. The source text makes this incredible claim that this whole drama serves as a lesson for all of creation to better understand God's love and character. So we're left to wonder, if this entire event is the lesson, what does that imply about the nature of the universe it was designed to teach? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.